Tonight, a single candle trembles in a stone chamber, its light stretching thin shadows across the walls as a young medieval bride sits quietly on the edge of a bed she has never chosen. Beyond the door, footsteps murmur, customs wait, and a life is about to change forever. This is not a tale of romance as we imagine it today, but a quieter, heavier story, one shaped by duty, fear, and endurance. Before we begin, take a moment to like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments. Let me know where you're watching from. Mayu in the US, settling in for the evening, somewhere in Europe near midnight, Canada winding down the night, or another corner of the world listening as the hours grow late. Your presence here connects this old story to the present moment. Now, get comfortable, lower the lights, let your breathing slow. This is a long, gentle journey into the past meant to be listened to softly, perhaps as sleep begins to find you. When you're ready, let us step quietly across the threshold and return to the narrative. Long before the wedding night arrived, dread often began its slow route in childhood. For many medieval women, marriage was not a choice discovered through affection, but a decision made in hushed conversations between fathers, uncles, and lords. The girl herself might be weaving wool, carrying water, or kneeling in prayer when her future was already being weighed like grain on a scale. She learned early that her body and her labor were part of an agreement. Marriage meant security for her family, alliances between households, or peace between rivals. Love, if it came at all, was expected to follow later quietly, obediently. As the years passed and her wedding day crept closer, stories drifted toward her like cold air under a door. Half-heard warnings from older women, silences that spoke louder than words. The wedding night, in particular, loomed as something unknown and unavoidable. No one explained it clearly. Modesty demanded ignorance, yet custom demanded compliance. She was told to be brave, to be dutiful, to trust in God's design. Fear had no place in the lessons she was given, yet fear settled anyway, soft, constant, and unspoken. As the church bells rang and vows were spoken, the celebration outside masked a quieter truth within her chest. This night would mark the end of girlhood and the beginning of a role she had been prepared for, but never truly allowed to understand. The candle burned lower, the chamber waited, and with it, centuries of expectation pressed gently, but firmly, upon her shoulders. In the days leading up to the wedding night, instruction came not through clear words, but through careful omissions. Mothers, aunts, and elder women rarely spoke plainly. Instead, they offered fragments, gentle warnings wrapped in practical advice: how to keep the household warm, how to stretch a loaf of bread through winter, how to remain quiet when needed. What mattered most was often left unsaid. A young bride might notice how conversations stopped when she entered a room, or how an older woman's hand lingered on her arm just a moment too long, as if to pass along courage without language. There were prayers whispered at bedside, blessings murmured over braided hair, and the repeated reminder to endure, to be patient, to be faithful, to accept what came as God's will. Ignorance was considered a virtue. To know too much was improper. To ask questions was shameful. And so fear grew in the empty spaces where knowledge should have lived. The wedding night became a shape without adjusting, something heavy and looming, defined only by the tension in other women's voices and the solemnity of the rituals surrounding it. As evening approached, the bride was bathed, dressed, and guided through ceremonies she barely understood. Laughter echoed in the hall beyond the chamber, but inside, the air felt still. The bed stood waiting, stiff and unfamiliar, more a symbol than a place of rest. In that quiet room, she carried generations of silence within her. Each breath was slow, measured, as though calm itself were a duty. Outside, the world celebrated. Inside, she prepared herself for an experience she had never been allowed to name. The candle flickered again, shadows shifting softly along the walls as time moved forward, whether she wished it to or not. As night settled fully over the village or manor, tradition stepped forward like an unyielding guide. In many places, the wedding night was not entirely private. Customs varied, but they shared a common purpose: proof. Proof that the marriage was real, binding, and beyond dispute. For a medieval woman, this knowledge added another layer to her unease. The idea that others might wait just beyond the door, listening, watching for signs, or expecting evidence come morning, turned a personal moment into a public obligation, even when no one stood directly nearby. The awareness of expectation filled the room as surely as the smoke from the hearth. She might have been led to the bed by female relatives, her veil lifted, her shoes removed with ceremonial care. Their faces were kind, but serious. This was not celebration now, it was transition. They offered final blessings, traced small signs of protection, and then withdrew, closing the door with a sound that echoed too loudly in her ears. The bed itself was often unfamiliar. It belonged not to her, but to the household she had entered. The sheets smelled of herbs meant to bring good fortune, yet they were stiff, newly laid, untouched. Sitting there, she became acutely aware of how little control she had over this moment, shaped by rules older than anyone alive. Outside, laughter faded into distant murmurs. Inside, time slowed. The bride listened to her own breathing, to the crackle of embers, to the faint sounds of a world that felt suddenly very far away. This was not fear born of one night alone, but of a lifetime spent being told that endurance was a woman's greatest strength. And so she waited, wrapped in expectation, custom pressing gently but firmly all around her. When the door finally opened again, it was not just a person who entered the chamber, but a future already decided. For many medieval women, the man who crossed that threshold was someone they barely knew. Perhaps they had exchanged polite words under watchful eyes, or shared a single formal dance at the feast. Familiarity had not been required. Agreement between families had been enough. The room seemed to grow smaller then, the air warmer, heavier. She kept her gaze lowered, as she had been taught, aware that every movement carried meaning. To appear calm was expected, to resist was unthinkable. This night was not framed as something shared, but something fulfilled. Marriage, she had been told, was her sacred duty. Obedience was praised as virtue, patience as strength. The teachings of the church and the laws of the land worked together, leaving little room for her own feelings to matter. Fear, uncertainty, and confusion were not discussed, only endurance. Even kindness, when it appeared, came unevenly. Some husbands were gentle, some distant, some harsh, but the bride had no way of knowing which future awaited her. The uncertainty itself was a quiet torment lying awake beside someone who was now her lord-in-law, if not in spirit. As the candle burned low, the chamber became a place of irreversible change. Childhood slipped away without ceremony, replaced by responsibility and expectation. What followed would shape her body, her role, and her worth in the eyes of society. Outside, night deepened. Inside, a medieval woman crossed an invisible line, one she could never step back over. For many medieval women, the dread of the wedding night did not rest on that single evening alone, but on what it promised to bring afterward. The night was a doorway, and beyond it lay years shaped by expectations that pressed quietly but constantly upon them. Chief among these was the certainty that their bodies would soon be called upon again and again, not for themselves, but for lineage. Motherhood was not optional, it was assumed. From the moment vows were spoken, a woman's worth became closely tied to her ability to bear children, especially sons. This knowledge lingered heavily in her thoughts as she lay awake in the dim chamber, listening to the soft sounds of night. Each breath carried with it the understanding that pain, risk, and responsibility were waiting just beyond this first step. Childbirth in the medieval world was dangerous, unpredictable, and deeply feared. Women had seen sisters, cousins, neighbors weakened or lost during labor. These memories were shared quietly, like warnings passed hand to hand. The wedding night was the beginning of that uncertain road, and so it carried the weight of future nights, future years, and future trials. Even joy, when it came, was shadowed by anxiety. A healthy child brought relief, but also the knowledge that another pregnancy would likely follow. Rest was brief. The body was rarely given time to heal, and yet women were expected to endure all of it with grace and faith, trusting that suffering had purpose. As the hours slipped by, the bride's thoughts wandered forward through time, imagining a life measured not in choices, but in duties fulfilled. The quiet fear she carried was not loud or dramatic, it was steady, like a low ache, woven into the fabric of her new role. And so the night passed slowly, not just marking a beginning, but hinting at everything that would come after. In the medieval world, a woman's body was often treated as both evidence and expectation. On the wedding night, it was not enough for vows to be spoken or blessings to be given. There was an unspoken demand that the marriage be confirmed through physical signs. This knowledge sat heavily with many brides, adding a quiet pressure that made rest difficult. Morning would come, and with it, questions, not always spoken aloud, but understood. Had the union been completed? Had the contract between families truly taken hold? In some households, older women were tasked with attending to linens, their expressions carefully neutral, their silence heavy with meaning. Privacy was thin, stretched almost to breaking. For the bride, this meant her body no longer felt like her own. It had become a symbol of honor, of alliance, of future children. Any discomfort she felt was secondary to what others needed from her. Even pain, when present, was something to be endured quietly, framed as a natural part of becoming a wife. Yet, within this expectation, many women carried small, private acts of resilience, a steady breath, a silent prayer, the grounding feel of the bed beneath them, reminding them that they were still real, still present, still human. These moments, though invisible to others, mattered deeply. As dawn crept closer, pale light pressing gently against the shutters, the chamber shifted from a place of uncertainty to one of consequence. The night's meaning would ripple outward, affecting how she was seen, spoken of, and treated. In that fragile space between darkness and morning, a medieval woman lay awake, aware that the world beyond the door was already forming its judgment. As the days followed the wedding night, life moved forward with surprising speed. There was little pause for reflection, little space to ask how the bride had felt, or what lingered quietly in her thoughts. Medieval society valued order and continuity above individual emotion, and so her inner world remained largely unseen. Meals were prepared, household routines resumed, new duties were introduced gently at first, then more firmly. She learned where supplies were kept, how servants expected to be addressed, how her husband preferred his evenings. Each task layered itself over the memory of that first night, slowly burying it beneath responsibility. There were no words for fear in this new role, at least, none that could be spoken openly. To express uncertainty was to risk being seen as ungrateful or weak, and so many women learned to tuck their feelings away, folding them neatly into silence. Strength, after all, was defined as endurance. Yet, even in this quiet acceptance, emotions found subtle ways to surface. A moment of stillness while washing linens, a pause at the window, watching clouds drift over fields she now belonged to. In these small spaces, she allowed herself to feel, to breathe, to remember who she had been before duty shaped her days. The wedding night did not stand alone as a single memory. It became part of a larger pattern, a reminder that her needs would often come second, her voice rarely sought. She arranged her hair, smoothed her gown, and adjusted the simple charms or herbs tucked carefully into her clothing. Each act was both practical and symbolic, a way to assert a measure of control in a world where so much was already decided for her. The candlelight cast gentle shadows, tracing the contours of the room, and she watched them shift as she moved. The sounds of the household distant laughter, the murmur of a stream beyond the walls, the creak of timber settling faded into a soft background hum, allowing her focus to settle inward. In this quiet, every breath and heartbeat became part of the ritual itself, each one grounding her in the present moment. Some brides recited prayers or blessings, not only for themselves but for the household, the marriage, and future children. These whispered words offered reassurance, connecting them to generations of women who had come before, who had faced the same uncertainty and fear. Even as her body trembled with apprehension, her mind found rhythm in these small, repeated gestures. The night was long, and preparation was not merely physical. It was mental, spiritual, and emotional, a careful layering of readiness, endurance, and hope. By the time the first hints of moonlight filtered through the window, she had built a quiet fortress of habit, knowledge, and silent strength, preparing herself to step gently, yet firmly, into what was expected of her. In this chamber, under the watchful flicker of candlelight, a medieval bride began to understand that her own inner rituals could be as protective and empowering as any guidance she had been given. Once the household quieted and the last echoes of celebration faded, the bride became acutely aware of the night itself. Every sound carried meaning: the rustle of leaves outside, the distant lowing of cattle, the occasional creak of timber as the house settled. Even the faintest whisper of wind through the shutters seemed amplified, filling the chamber with life beyond her own. Listening became a way to center herself. The night offered a rhythm, a pulse that was steady and impartial. It reminded her that the world continued outside her fears, outside expectation, outside duty. There was solace in this constancy, a quiet reminder that she was part of something larger, even when her choices were limited. Her own body became part of the soundscape as well, the soft rise and fall of her chest, the gentle brush of fingers against fabric, the quiet shuffle of feet on stone. Each subtle noise grounded her, making the vast, unknown night feel a little smaller, a little more familiar. Awareness of these details gave her a sense of presence, a gentle assertion that she was alive and aware, even in a space designed to measure her obedience and endurance. In the quiet, anticipation shifted slightly, softened by observation. The night was no longer only a harbinger of fear. It was also a companion, patient and constant, offering rhythm and continuity. Here, she could breathe, could pause, could feel her heart steady as she prepared for the moments to come, one measured breath at a time. In the stillness of the chamber, courage appeared softly, almost imperceptibly, like the flicker of a candle flame resisting a gentle draught. It was not bold or dramatic, but subtle, growing from within her as she remained present in the quiet night. Each small act, adjusting the folds of her gown, brushing a stray hair from her face, or simply taking a slow, steady breath, became a tiny assertion of control over the unknown. She remembered the stories of older women, their voices low but firm, and realized that endurance had a rhythm she could learn. Strength was not loud. It was the quiet persistence of being present, of carrying oneself steadily through fear. Even trembling became part of that rhythm, a reminder that she was alive, aware, and capable of facing the night's expectations. The candlelight danced on the walls, and with each flicker, shadows shifted, mirroring the subtle changes within her own heart. Anxiety and courage intertwined, moving in tandem like two threads in a single braid. Neither was complete without the other, and both were necessary for her to navigate the space she occupied. Outside, the world slept or whispered in the distance, but inside, a quiet determination took hold. The bride understood that courage did not remove fear. It simply allowed her to meet it, to breathe through it, and to step forward, moment by moment, into the life that awaited her beyond tradition and ritual. Even in a room heavy with expectation, a bride could find small comforts to steady herself. The texture of the bedspread beneath her fingers, the faint scent of herbs woven into the linens, or the smooth surface of a wooden chair became tiny anchors in the shifting landscape of the night. These simple details reminded her that while much of her life was dictated by duty, the present moment still offered something tangible she could hold on to. The candle flickered, casting dancing patterns across the walls. She watched the shadows stretch and bend, noticing how the light softened the corners of the chamber and made the space feel slightly less imposing. Each observation was a quiet act of mindfulness, a gentle way of claiming her surroundings as her own, if only for a moment. Even the rhythm of her own heartbeat became a source of grounding. She could feel it in her chest, a steady companion in the silence. Breath by breath, pulse by pulse, she created a sense of rhythm that calmed the mind and eased tension. In these small ways, the night became less of a trial to endure and more of a space where she could gather herself, mentally and emotionally, for what was to come. In the hush, the bride realized that strength could be found in details tiny, careful acts of presence and awareness. Even when the world demanded submission, she could claim these fleeting moments for herself, building a quiet resilience that would carry her through the night and beyond. As the night deepened, time seemed to stretch and bend, each minute carrying its own weight. The bride's thoughts moved in quiet, measured cycles, like a slow dance with the unknown. She imagined the hours ahead, not as a single overwhelming event, but as a sequence of moments, each one navigable, if taken gently, one at a time. The room itself seemed to respond to her stillness. Shadows stretched lazily across the walls, flickering with the candlelight, while the faint scent of herbs and beeswax hung in the air. Even the faint draft from the slightly open window seemed deliberate, carrying with it the whisper of the outside world and reminding her that life continued beyond expectation and duty. Anticipation was no longer merely fear, it had become rhythm. Her hands rested lightly on the bed, fingertips tracing the fabric, drawing comfort from texture and familiarity. Breaths deepened, aligning with the subtle movements of the candle flame. Every sound, every flicker, every gentle sensation became part of the slow choreography of the night. In this space, she realized that patience itself was a form of strength. By attending to each small detail, by allowing herself to move through the night, moment by moment, she began to reclaim some measure of agency. Fear and expectation remained, but they no longer dominated her entirely. Instead, they became companions she could meet with quiet, deliberate awareness. As the night stretched on, the bride found herself turning inward, drawing upon memory and imagination to navigate the unknown. Thoughts of her childhood home, familiar faces, and comforting routines became a mental refuge. Even small recollections, favorite window where sunlight pooled, the smell of freshly baked bread, the sound of a cat's purr provided a sense of stability amid the uncertainty of her new life. Imagination, too, offered a gentle escape. She envisioned herself moving confidently through the household, learning the rhythms of her husband's world, discovering quiet corners of the estate where she could rest, and picturing moments of kindness she might encounter. These imagined scenes were not fantasies of escape, but tools for resilience, helping her prepare emotionally for the life unfolding before her. The chamber, once heavy with anticipation, began to feel like a space for reflection. Shadows on the walls seemed less threatening, flickering instead as reminders of the life she carried with her memories, hopes, and the inner strength that had been cultivated over years of careful observation and quiet endurance. In the solitude of the night, memory and imagination intertwined, forming a gentle, sustaining rhythm. Each thought, each recollection, each imagined scene became part of her inner armor, allowing her to face the challenges of the wedding night and the nights beyond with steadiness and a quietly growing sense of confidence. In the still chamber, the bride felt the subtle, gentle weight of tradition pressing around her. Centuries of customs, whispered lessons, and inherited expectations seemed to linger in the air, invisible yet palpable. Every aspect of the room, the placement of the bed, the herbs scattered across the linen, the faint scent of beeswax from the candles spoke of practices meant to guide her through the night. Tradition could feel heavy, but it also offered structure. Each ritual, each carefully laid detail, provided a roadmap, however intimidating, through the unknown. By attending to these small acts, arranging her gown, checking the hearth, following the rhythms she had been taught, she began to orient herself in a world that often offered little guidance beyond duty. The knowledge that women before her had walked the same path lent quiet reassurance. Though fear was natural, endurance was possible. Custom, though unyielding, could be approached slowly, deliberately, and with attention. In that careful navigation, the bride found a measure of control. She could act with awareness, even within expectation, turning ritual into a source of stability rather than oppression. The candlelight flickered, casting moving shapes along the stone walls. Each shadow seemed to echo the quiet passage of time, marking the slow unfolding of night. Within that rhythm, the bride learned that tradition, though imposing, also offered moments of grounding, opportunities to center herself, to breathe, and to gather strength before stepping fully into the life expected of her. As the night deepened, the bride discovered that much of this first evening was spent in waiting for events she could not control, waiting for sounds to fade or approach, waiting for the unknown to unfold. At first, waiting felt heavy, almost unbearable, each moment stretching endlessly, filled with tension and uncertainty. Yet slowly, waiting revealed itself as an art. It required patience, attention, and quiet awareness. She learned to notice the small details, the shift of candlelight across the walls, the faint smell of herbs in the air, the distant creak of timber as the house settled. Each subtle change offered an anchor, a reminder that time moved forward gently, and that she could move with it. Waiting also allowed reflection. She thought about herself not as the girl who had grown up under the weight of expectation, but as the woman she was becoming. Strength, she realized, was not only in action, but also in stillness. The ability to wait, to breathe, to observe, became a skill as valuable as any taught by family or custom. The room, silent yet alive with shadows and faint sounds, became a place of preparation. In embracing the slow rhythm of waiting, the bride began to gather courage, to center her thoughts, and to ready herself for what lay ahead. Night, she discovered, could be as much about reflection and quiet fortitude as it was about obligation and fear. The chamber seemed to breathe with the bride as she settled into its quiet rhythm. Shadows stretched long across the stone walls, their movements slow and deliberate in the flickering candlelight. The soft glow illuminated familiar details and transformed the unfamiliar ones, creating a space that was at once intimidating and strangely comforting. She watched the interplay of light and shadow, noticing the subtle shapes that shifted with each breath of air. The candle's flame danced gently, responding to drafts she barely felt, casting patterns that seemed almost alive. Each flicker reminded her of impermanence, that even fear, like the shadows, could move and change. The soft warmth of the candle and the faint scent of herbs offered a small consolation. Her hands traced the edges of the bedding, feeling the texture of the fabric and the careful preparation that had gone into this chamber. These small, grounded sensations became a steadying force, a gentle counterbalance to the anticipation swirling in her mind. Still, within the steady rhythm of daily life, some women found a cautious balance, learning when to speak, when to remain silent, and how to protect a small core of self beneath layers of expectation. As evening returned once more, the chamber felt different now. Familiar, perhaps, but no less heavy with meaning. Night after night would follow, each one shaped by the customs of a world that seldom asked how she truly felt. In quiet corners of medieval life, far from the authority of church and law, women found ways to speak to one another. These moments were brief and careful, shared while spinning wool, tending fires, or walking together at dusk. It was here, in half-whispered conversations, that truths sometimes surfaced. Older women did not speak directly of wedding nights, but their stories carried echoes. They spoke of patience learned the hard way, of nights endured, and mornings faced with steady resolve. Advice was practical rather than emotional. How to ease the body, how to claim small comforts, how to recognize when kindness might be found and when silence was safer. These exchanges offered something rare: recognition. A young wife might hear her own unspoken feelings reflected back at her, not as weakness, but as a shared experience. Fear, she learned, was not hers alone. Generations before her had felt it too, and generations would feel it after. There was comfort in this quiet lineage of understanding, though the world above them demanded obedience. Within these small circles, women acknowledged one another's strength. They did not frame endurance as romance or destiny, but as survival, a skill honed over time. As evening shadows lengthened and work drew to a close, these conversations faded, leaving behind a sense of connection that lingered long after words ended. The wedding night, once a solitary dread, became part of a collective memory carried softly from woman to woman. In these shared silences and careful words, medieval women built an invisible network of support, fragile, yet deeply sustaining. For many medieval women, faith was woven tightly into every understanding of marriage and the wedding night. The church offered explanations when no others were given, framing duty as divine order and endurance as spiritual strength. In moments of uncertainty, prayer became both refuge and instruction. A bride was often told that obedience within marriage pleased God, that suffering carried meaning beyond the present moment. These teachings could feel heavy, yet they also offered structure in a world filled with unknowns. When fear stirred in the quiet hours of night, she might turn her thoughts toward familiar prayers, their rhythms steady and calming, like a path she knew by heart. Candles burned before small images of saints believed to watch over women, mothers, and households. Touching a worn rosary or whispering a prayer into the dark gave her something firm to hold on to when the future felt uncertain. Faith did not erase fear, but it softened its edges, giving it a place to rest. At the same time, religion reinforced expectation. The wedding night was not just custom, it was sacrament. To question it was to question divine will itself. And so belief offered comfort while also closing doors, guiding her toward acceptance rather than resistance. As the night deepened, the quiet chamber became almost chapel-like, filled with shadows and stillness. In that space, a medieval woman balanced hope and obligation, drawing strength from belief while learning, slowly, how to live within its bounds. Time, in the medieval world, moved with a patient rhythm. Days were marked by light and labor, nights by rest and routine. Slowly, almost imperceptibly, the sharp edge of dread that once surrounded the wedding night began to dull, not because the world had changed, but because the woman herself adapted. Acceptance was not surrender in a single moment. It was built gradually, through repetition and familiarity. The chamber that once felt strange became known. The sounds of the household settled into predictable patterns. Even the presence beside her at night grew less unfamiliar, shaped by habit rather than understanding. For some women, this rhythm brought a measure of calm. Predictability could feel like safety. Knowing what was expected and when allowed her to prepare herself emotionally and physically. In a life where choice was limited, routine became a kind of shelter. Yet acceptance did not mean forgetting. The memory of that first night remained, quietly influential, shaping how she understood herself and her place in the world. It taught her where her boundaries lay, not in terms of power, but in endurance. She learned what she could carry and how to carry it without breaking. In small, almost invisible ways, she reclaimed fragments of control. A favorite place by the hearth, a moment alone at dawn, a steadying breath taken before sleep. These acts were modest, but meaningful, offering balance within constraint. As seasons turned and years unfolded, the wedding night became part of a larger tapestry, no longer a single point of fear, but a thread woven into the fabric of her life. Even within the strict confines of duty, medieval women found subtle ways to share their experiences, offering companionship that was not always vocal, but deeply felt. Sisters-in-law, cousins, or older women in the household often became quiet guides, teaching through presence rather than explicit instruction. The bride might notice how an older woman moved through the chamber with ease, handling tasks without a word, or how a sister-in-law's calm gaze suggested reassurance. These small gestures, almost imperceptible, helped her learn how to navigate her new life without drawing unwanted attention. Observation became a language of survival, a way to absorb wisdom without needing to speak. The act of watching and being watched carried a dual weight. On one hand, it reminded her that she was never entirely alone. Someone had endured before, and someone could offer guidance without judgment. On the other, it reinforced the knowledge that her every action was subject to scrutiny. Every hesitation, every sigh, every slight movement could be interpreted as obedience or defiance, readiness or reluctance. Within this tension, women discovered the power of subtlety. A well-timed word, a quiet nod, or the careful arrangement of a bed or cloth became forms of agency. These small acts allowed them to carve a space for themselves, even when the world expected them to disappear into tradition and duty. As the night deepened once more, the bride sat quietly in her chamber, learning from those who had walked this path before. Through silent companionship, she began to sense that endurance did not have to erase individuality, that even within expectation there could be room to exist as herself. He bridal chamber, with its cold stone walls and heavy wooden furniture, often reflected the inner life of the woman who entered it. Each shadow seemed to stretch long and deliberate, echoing the tension she carried. The candlelight flickered gently, revealing corners of the room that remained hidden in darkness, much like the thoughts she kept private. The bed, stiff and unfamiliar, was more than a place for rest. It was a symbol of transition. Sheets, carefully arranged, smelled faintly of herbs, meant to bring protection or fertility. Every detail, from the placement of a chair to the small stool in the corner, carried expectation. To sit, to move, to lie down, every action was imbued with ritual significance, a reminder that the night was not simply a private event, but a moment woven into custom and judgment. In this stillness, the bride began to notice her own heartbeat as a quiet companion, slow and deliberate. Her hands, resting lightly in her lap, became anchors. The very air of the chamber, cool against her skin, seemed to invite reflection. Here, in this intimate yet imposing space, she confronted her feelings: fear, anticipation, curiosity, and the faint spark of resilience that had grown over years of quiet observation and preparation. Even as shadows danced along the walls, she learned that emotion need not be loud to exist. The chamber mirrored her experience, vast, imposing, and heavy with tradition, yet softened in corners where light fell and where she could breathe. It was here, in the silence between moments, that she began to understand her own capacity to endure and to find small comforts within the weight of expectation. As the evening deepened, the room seemed to hold its breath, carrying the quiet pulse of anticipation. Time moved slowly, measured not by clocks but by the rhythm of shadows across the walls and the flicker of candlelight. Each moment stretched, allowing the bride to feel every detail: the rough texture of the wooden floor beneath her feet, the faint scent of herbs in the air, the cool brush of the evening breeze through a slightly open window. Anticipation was not always sharp or frantic. Often it was soft, like a current under the surface of still water. She felt it in her chest, a gentle pressing that reminded her the night was approaching, a threshold she could not yet see. Her thoughts wandered, imagining what might come, recalling lessons and warnings, and slowly rehearsing patience as a skill to carry with her. Her body, tense with the unknown, began to adjust to stillness. Shoulders relaxed just enough to remember that not every instant demanded action. Breaths deepened. Fingers traced patterns on the fabric of her gown, as if finding rhythm could quiet the mind. Even fear, when it surfaced, became part of the rhythm, a measured note in a larger, unfolding symphony of experience. Outside, distant voices of the household softened as the evening wore on. Inside, the chamber held its own quiet life: shadows stretching, candlelight dancing, the air thick with expectation. In this suspended moment, the bride was both present and preparing, feeling the slow unfolding of a night that was as much about endurance and understanding as it was about ritual and obligation. Even during the celebrations of the wedding day, the bride often felt a peculiar solitude. Surrounded by relatives, servants, and neighbors, she moved among them with polite smiles and careful gestures. Laughter, music, and clinking goblets filled the halls, yet a subtle divide separated her from the world around her. The crowd carried expectations she could not meet alone, while her own thoughts drifted toward the night yet to come. This sense of isolation was quiet but pervasive. She noticed how every gaze lingered slightly longer, how each word carried double meaning, partly affection, partly assessment. Her life had become a delicate balancing act. She had to participate fully in the day's rituals, while also guarding her own emotions, holding them safely beneath the surface. To show too much nervousness or curiosity was dangerous. To show too little could appear cold or disinterested. In the bridal chamber later, this solitude expanded. No matter who had been present during the day, the night demanded that she face the unknown mostly alone. There were no guides for this moment, only lessons learned from observation, whispers from older women, and the instinctive understanding that her endurance mattered most. Yet solitude also offered a strange kind of clarity. In the hush of the chamber, she could observe her own heartbeat, her own thoughts, her own courage. Every shadow on the wall, every flicker of candlelight became a companion. Even in the absence of company, she began to sense a quiet resilience forming within, a soft, steady strength she could call upon again and again. In the quiet of her chamber, the bride felt the full weight of expectations settle around her like a thick, invisible cloak. It pressed gently but insistently against her shoulders, reminding her of her duties, her place, and the life that awaited. Every movement, every thought, every breath seemed measured against an unseen standard she could never fully know. The lessons of her childhood and the whispers of older women had prepared her for endurance, but not for the intensity of that first night. Every detail, the bed, the candlelight, the hush of the room seemed charged with meaning. Even the simple act of sitting or lying down carried significance, as if the world were observing her silently, judging her readiness. Her mind traced the path of tradition, marriage as duty, obedience as virtue, and fertility as proof of compliance. These ideas were not abstract. They were tangible, pressing against her with the force of generations. Yet within that weight, a quiet defiance emerged, not loud or confrontational, but subtle. She realized that endurance itself was a kind of power, a skill she could wield in the spaces where choice seemed absent. As the night deepened, she breathed slowly, letting the rhythm of her own heart remind her that she was more than obligation. The shadows softened, the candle flickered gently, and the room became a space where fear and courage coexisted. Each moment of stillness offered her a tiny refuge, a place to gather herself before stepping fully into the world's expectations. In this delicate balance, the bride learned that even under the heaviest weight, there could be quiet strength, a strength that would carry her through not only this night, but all the nights to come. As the evening stretched on, the bride's preparations took on a ritualistic quality, each movement slow and deliberate. In the quiet interplay of shadows and light, the bride felt a growing awareness of her own presence. She was here, alive, and capable of perceiving the world around her with attention and care. The night no longer seemed only a test to endure. It became a space where she could meet her own fear with quiet observation, allowing both courage and contemplation to coexist in the stillness. In the hushed chamber, the bride began to notice the night itself as a living presence. Each inhalation drew in the cool, faintly scented air, carrying the subtle fragrances of herbs, wood, and candle smoke. Each exhalation released tension she hadn't realized she was holding, a small act of release that reminded her of her own resilience. The room's quiet rhythm matched her heartbeat. The occasional creak of timber or soft sigh of wind through the shutters became part of a gentle, meditative cadence. Time seemed to slow, and with it, the sharp edges of fear dulled. The very act of breathing slow, deliberate, intentional offered her a sense of grounding, a reminder that she could inhabit the night without being overcome by it. Her thoughts turned inward, noticing the steady rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her hands, the weight of her gown against her skin. These small sensations were tangible and real, a soft counterpoint to the abstract pressure of expectation pressing in from every side. She allowed herself to focus fully on the present, recognizing that courage was built not in grand gestures, but in sustained attention to these quiet, living moments. By aligning herself with the breath of the night, the bride discovered a new rhythm of endurance. Fear remained, but it no longer ruled her entirely. Inhaling and exhaling became a gentle affirmation. She was present, aware, and capable of facing the slow unfolding of the evening with steady, quiet grace. As the night deepened further, the bride began to feel the subtle calm that exists between shadows. The candlelight softened, flickering gently against the stone walls, and the air seemed to settle, carrying only the faintest sounds of the household beyond. In this quiet, the weight of expectation did not vanish, but it became a background hum rather than an overwhelming presence. She noticed how her own body had adapted to the stillness. Her shoulders were less tense, her hands rested lightly in her lap, and her mind, though alert, had found a rhythm that felt like a quiet companion. Each movement she made, adjusting the folds of her gown, brushing a lock of hair behind her ear, was deliberate and grounding, reminding her that even within the strictures of duty, she could move with purpose. The chamber itself seemed to mirror this newfound calm. The flickering shadows no longer startled her. Instead, they moved with the rhythm of the candle, gentle and predictable. The scent of herbs hung faintly, steadying her senses, and the distant creak of timber became almost musical in its regularity. Night, once a source of anticipation and anxiety, had become a space she could inhabit fully, at her own pace. In these quiet intervals, the bride discovered a subtle truth. Endurance was not only about facing duty, but also about finding the spaces within it to breathe, to observe, and to gather strength. The calm between shadows became her refuge, a gentle reminder that even in a world of expectation, moments of peace could be found. As hours passed, the bride's eyes slowly traced the familiar contours of the chamber. The rough-hewn walls, the sturdy wooden bed, the flickering candlelight all became companions in their own quiet way. The room, once alien and imposing, had begun to feel like a space she could navigate with care and intention. Every texture offered reassurance. Her fingers brushed against the smooth fabric of the sheets, the worn wood of the chair, the faintly embroidered patterns of her gown. Each touch reminded her that while much of her life was shaped by others' expectations, she could still find moments of control, however small, in the present. Sounds, too, became comforting. The soft rustle of night wind, the distant creak of the household, even the gentle tapping of her own heartbeat blended into a soothing rhythm. The night no longer felt threatening. It had settled into a gentle companion, moving at the pace she could match. In this growing familiarity, the bride found herself breathing more steadily. Each inhalation and exhalation became a reminder of her own presence, her own endurance. Fear, though lingering, had softened into a quiet awareness, and she realized that navigating this space, this night, required patience as much as courage. Small comforts, light sound, texture became her allies, guiding her through the long hours with gentle steadiness. In the depth of night, silence became a presence as tangible as the walls around her. It pressed softly, enveloping the bride in a cocoon of quiet that both unnerved and soothed. In this stillness, she became aware of every small sound her body made, the soft rustle of fabric, the quiet exhale of breath, the faint beating of her own heart. These sounds, once unnoticed, became markers of her existence, affirming that she was here, present, and enduring. Silence also amplified thought. Memories, fears, hopes all rose gently to the surface, mingling without judgment. She recalled stories passed down from older women, moments of quiet strength, and the lessons she had absorbed through observation. Each reflection, Each mental rehearsal helped her gather patience and courage, preparing her for both the unknown of the night and the responsibilities to come. Yet silence was not empty. It was active. It allowed her to notice details: the shifting shadows, the warmth of the bed, the scent of herbs, the faint breeze through the shutters. These small sensations became her companions, reminders that even when alone, she was capable of presence, of attention, and of measured endurance. Through the weight of silence, the bride discovered a subtle power, the ability to inhabit her space fully, to breathe, and to feel without fear overpowering her. Night had slowed, and in the stillness, she learned that endurance was not merely obligation, it was also quiet, deliberate awareness. In the quiet of the chamber, courage revealed itself slowly, a persistent, gentle presence rather than a sudden surge. Each breath she took, steady and deliberate, reinforced her awareness that she could meet the night with measured resilience. It was a quiet power, woven from years of observation, whispered advice, and the subtle lessons of endurance she had absorbed from the women before her. Even in moments of doubt, she noticed how her body responded: shoulders relaxing slightly, hands resting with ease, chest rising and falling in a slow rhythm. Courage was not the absence of fear. Rather, it was the choice to remain present, to acknowledge her apprehension without being controlled by it. Each tiny act of adjusting the folds of her gown, smoothing her hair, shifting to a more comfortable position became a reaffirmation of this inner strength. The candlelight flickered across the chamber, casting soft, moving shadows that seemed to mirror her own internal rhythm. The night outside, distant and muted, whispered a gentle reminder that time flowed steadily, and that each moment could be met in turn. In this shared rhythm of breath, light, and quiet, she discovered that persistence was a form of courage, just as vital as boldness. By embracing the gentle persistence of courage, the bride allowed herself a small but profound freedom. Fear could coexist with bravery, and anticipation could be tempered by presence. In this quiet interplay, she found a rhythm that would carry her through the night and through the long journey of life ahead. Though the bride remained in the chamber, stillness and motion coexisted in subtle ways. Her fingers traced the edges of the bedspread, her eyes followed the shifting candlelight, and her feet brushed lightly against the stone floor. Each small movement became a meditation, a way to anchor herself in the present while the night stretched endlessly around her. Movement, however slight, brought awareness. It reminded her that she was capable of choice, however limited, and that her body could respond with gentleness and intention. The rising and falling of her chest, the stretch of her arms, the shifting of her weight all were evidence of her presence and agency within a space that had seemed dictated entirely by others. Even in stillness, motion persisted in her thoughts. Memories, expectations, and imagined scenarios drifted gently through her mind, moving like soft currents beneath the surface of quiet observation. She allowed them to flow without resistance, noticing their texture and tone, and letting them pass without being overwhelmed. Through the interplay of stillness and motion, the bride discovered a subtle equilibrium. Fear and anticipation remained, but they were balanced by awareness, movement, and presence. Night had become a teacher, revealing that endurance was not passive submission, but an active, deliberate participation in each moment, even in the quietest, slowest of hours. As the night deepened, the bride began to sense the quiet echo of experiences that had come before her. The lessons of older women, whispered and observed, seemed to resonate softly in the chamber, as if the walls themselves held memories of endurance, patience, and subtle courage. Though unspoken, these echoes provided reassurance that she was not alone in her apprehension or her strength. She reflected on the ways women had navigated similar nights through prayer, quiet observation, and careful attention to small details. Each memory and story she recalled offered a framework for understanding her own responses, helping her to see fear as natural and courage as cultivated. The echo of experience became a gentle guide, suggesting ways to inhabit her space with calm and dignity. Even the chamber itself felt familiar now, transformed by her growing awareness. The candlelight, flickering softly, revealed textures she had learned to appreciate. The scent of herbs became comforting rather than imposing. The shadows seemed less like threats and more like companions moving with her through time. The night had shifted from a test to endure into a landscape she could traverse deliberately, one breath, one observation, one heartbeat at a time. In listening to these echoes, the bride discovered the quiet power of continuity, the sense that her own experience was part of a larger story of resilience and adaptation. She felt steadier, more rooted, and increasingly capable of meeting both the remainder of the night and the life that awaited her beyond it. By the middle of the night, the bride had begun to find solace in the subtle rituals she performed. Each careful adjustment of her gown, each small gesture of smoothing the sheets, and every whispered prayer became part of a personal rhythm that steadied her mind and body. These repeated acts, familiar and deliberate, offered reassurance in a world that had demanded so much obedience and endurance. The candlelight danced quietly on the walls, and she noticed how its patterns shifted in response to even the gentlest movements. The act of observing these changes, of aligning her attention with the small, predictable fluctuations of the night, created a gentle sense of mastery. In a life where control was limited, these rituals became her own space where presence and intention were hers alone. Sounds of the household had faded, leaving a steady quiet, even the subtle noises of her own body, the breath flowing in and out. The soft rustle of fabric became part of this meditative rhythm. The night itself felt alive, yet safe, and she allowed herself to sink into the patterns she had created, embracing the comfort that came from repeated, mindful acts. Through these rituals, the bride discovered a delicate form of empowerment. Though the world outside continued to impose expectations, within the chamber she could move with deliberate attention, finding strength and serenity in the rhythm of her own making. In the quiet hours, the bride began to recognize the power of simply being present. She had spent so long anticipating, fearing, and observing that now, in the stillness, she understood that presence itself was a kind of strength. Each breath she drew, each gentle movement of her hands, each careful glance at the flickering candlelight was a reminder that she existed fully in the moment. This awareness allowed her to meet the night without being entirely swept away by expectation or anxiety. Presence became a soft anchor, grounding her in the physical world and in the rhythm of the chamber. She noticed the texture of the bedspread beneath her fingers, the slight warmth of the air against her skin, and the subtle scent of herbs lingering from earlier preparations. Each detail reaffirmed that she was here, alive and attentive, capable of facing whatever might come next. Even shadows, once imposing, now seemed like companions rather than threats. The shifting light and dark mirrored the ebb and flow of her own emotions, reminding her that fear and courage could coexist. In acknowledging both without judgment, she discovered a new layer of resilience, one born not from avoidance or denial, but from gentle, deliberate awareness. By the slow cultivation of presence, the bride found a quiet empowerment. The night, with all its uncertainty, no longer loomed as a force to conquer. Instead, it became a space in which she could inhabit her own strength, one measured breath and one steady heartbeat at a time. As the night unfolded, the bride became attuned to the gentle flow of time itself. It moved not in abrupt measures, but as a soft, continuous current that carried her forward, moment by moment. Each flicker of candlelight, each shifting shadow, and each distant creak of timber marked a passage, a rhythm that was at once constant and comforting. She noticed how the hours seemed to stretch and bend, allowing her to inhabit the space fully, to breathe deeply, and to observe herself with care. Anticipation remained, but it no longer dominated her thoughts. It had softened into a quiet awareness, a rhythm she could follow like a gentle stream. Every inhalation and exhalation aligned with this flow, grounding her in the present and reminding her that the night was passing steadily, step by step. The chamber, with its familiar textures and subtle scents, became a vessel in which she could navigate both fear and patience. The softness of the bed, the warmth of the air, and the muted candlelight all contributed to a sense of continuity. In this slow current of time, she found reassurance that endurance was possible, that she could move through the night at her own pace, and that each moment could be met with calm attention. By aligning herself with the gentle flow of time, the bride discovered a sustaining rhythm. The night, once overwhelming, became a space in which courage, patience, and quiet strength could coexist, supporting her as she prepared for the life ahead. In the stillness of the chamber, the bride discovered an intimacy she had not expected, an intimacy with her own thoughts, her own body, and the subtle rhythms of the night. Awareness became her companion, steady and non-judgmental, offering a gentle form of support amidst the tension and uncertainty that had marked the hours before. She noticed the rise and fall of her chest, the warmth of her hands resting lightly on her lap, and the soft brush of fabric against her skin. Each detail, once overlooked or taken for granted, now carried significance, anchoring her in the present. The quiet rustle of the candle flame, the subtle scent of herbs, and the distant hush of the household blended together, creating a layered sensory world that both grounded and soothed her. This intimacy was not about others, it was wholly her own. She realized that the strength she felt in observing herself, in noticing her own rhythms and responses, was a kind of quiet power. It allowed her to move through the night with measured patience, facing fear not as a force to resist, but as a companion to acknowledge and integrate. By embracing the intimacy of awareness, the bride began to sense that the night, once fraught with anxiety, had become a space of reflection, understanding, and subtle resilience. She was learning that endurance did not demand the erasure of self, but could coexist with the careful cultivation of presence, observation, and gentle courage. As the hours deepened, the bride discovered that routine offered a quiet, stabilizing guard against uncertainty. Each repeated action arranging the bedspread, brushing a strand of hair from her face, adjusting the candle became a small anchor, a way to assert control within a space shaped largely by expectation. The predictability of these gestures created a rhythm that soothed the mind and steadied the heart. Even the smallest details mattered. The scent of herbs reminded her of protective traditions. The flicker of light signaled the passage of time, and the softness of the bed provided comfort for both body and spirit. Through these repeated acts, she reclaimed a sense of agency, subtle yet profound, allowing her to inhabit the night deliberately rather than passively. The quiet persistence of routine also reinforced endurance. Each careful motion reminded her that she could navigate fear and anticipation step by step. The night, which once seemed an insurmountable threshold, now unfolded as a series of manageable moments. Breath by breath, gesture by gesture, she moved through it with measured care. In embracing the gentle guard of routine, the bride realized that strength could be found not in grand gestures, but in the quiet repetition of mindful actions. The night, once heavy with expectation, became a space where calm observation and subtle resilience coexisted, carrying her steadily toward the hours yet to come. As the night continued, the shadows that danced along the chamber walls became more than mere reflections of light. They became a gentle reassurance, no longer frightening or oppressive. They moved predictably, shifting with the flicker of the candle and the subtle sway of air. The bride noticed how these soft, slow changes mirrored the rhythm of her own thoughts and breathing, creating a sense of continuity and quiet companionship. She let her gaze follow the shifting shapes, tracing their movement as though learning a secret language of the room. The shadows reminded her that change could be gentle, imperceptible, yet constant. Fear too could move and ebb, softened by the awareness that each moment passed in its own time. There was no need to rush, no need to force understanding. All that was required was presence. Even the smallest sounds contributed to this reassurance. The faint creak of timber, the whisper of wind, and the muted pulse of her own heartbeat became part of a steady, meditative cadence. In listening carefully, she found balance, grounding herself in the sensory world around her while keeping her mind centered. Through this quiet observation, the bride learned that the night, once looming with dread, could offer subtle comfort. Shadows, light, and sound worked together as guides, showing her that even in uncertainty, resilience and calm could be cultivated with gentle attention. As the night deepened further, the bride began to feel a subtle strength emerging from knowing herself. The long hours had allowed her to observe her own reactions, her fears, her anticipations, and her quiet moments of resilience. Each breath, each heartbeat, each careful gesture had become a mirror, reflecting both vulnerability and endurance. She realized that self-knowledge offered a kind of quiet power. By understanding the patterns of her thoughts and emotions, she could navigate the night with more ease, meeting fear not as an overwhelming force, but as a companion she could acknowledge and move alongside. Awareness of herself became a shield, soft yet reliable, reinforcing the endurance she had been cultivating since stepping into the bridal chamber. Even the smallest insights mattered. She noted how a deep inhale steadied her nerves, how tracing the fabric of her gown reassured her hands, and how watching shadows shift allowed her mind to release tension. Each recognition reinforced the idea that she possessed resources within herself, quietly potent, that could carry her through the hours and the days to come. In this space of self-knowledge, the night transformed from a singular trial into a landscape she could navigate with intention and calm. Courage, patience, and resilience intertwined seamlessly, and she understood that enduring was not merely about submitting to expectation, it was about inhabiting her own presence with gentle strength. As the night lingered, the bride discovered the gentle resilience of her own mind. Thoughts came and went, fears of the unknown, memories of advice from older women, fleeting imaginings of comfort, but none of them overwhelmed her. Instead, she learned to observe each one with quiet attentiveness, letting them pass without clinging, as clouds drift across a still sky. Her mind, once filled with anxious anticipation, now moved with deliberation. She allowed herself to notice the texture of her surroundings, the smooth wood of the chair, the softness of the bedspread, the subtle flicker of candlelight. Each detail became a point of grounding, a reminder that she existed fully in this moment, capable of facing both fear and expectation with calm awareness. Breath and thought began to align, forming a rhythm that carried through the night. Anxiety and courage coexisted, interwoven in a pattern that was neither forced nor frantic. She recognized that endurance was as much mental as it was physical. a quiet persistence that allowed her to navigate uncertainty without losing her sense of self. In embracing the soft resilience of the mind, the bride felt a growing steadiness. The night, once daunting and heavy with expectation, had become a space in which she could inhabit both her fears and her strength, moving gently through the hours with measured presence and calm attention. By now, the bride had grown deeply attuned to the gentle interplay of light and stillness in her chamber. The candle flickered softly, sending long, wavering shadows across the stone walls, while the air remained calm, carrying only faint scents of herbs and beeswax. Each flicker seemed to echo the rhythm of her own breath, slow and deliberate, a quiet accompaniment to the stillness surrounding her. She noticed how movement and pause were intertwined. Her fingers traced the fabric of her gown, then rested. Her eyes followed the shifting shadows, then closed in reflection. This subtle dance of light and stillness mirrored the balance she was cultivating within herself, fear tempered by awareness, anxiety softened by patience, and expectation met with gentle courage. Even the quiet sounds of the house beyond the chamber became part of this rhythm, a distant creak, a muted footstep, the sigh of wind through the shutters. None demanded immediate reaction. All were absorbed into the measured cadence of the night. She realized that by aligning herself with these subtle patterns, she could navigate the uncertainty of the wedding night with calm, deliberate attention. In embracing the dance of light and stillness, the bride discovered a profound sense of presence. The night no longer existed solely as a challenge to endure it, had become a space of observation, reflection, and quiet empowerment, carrying her gently through each passing hour. As the night moved steadily forward, the bride discovered the deep, sustaining power of patience. It was not a hurried or forced endurance, but a quiet, deliberate willingness to inhabit each moment fully, allowing time itself to guide her. Each breath, each subtle movement, each careful observation became a thread in the fabric of her patience, weaving a sense of calm through the chamber. She felt the subtle strength in waiting, in allowing events to unfold at their own pace rather than forcing or resisting them. The flicker of candlelight, the soft rustle of the night wind, and the gentle warmth of the bed all contributed to a rhythm she could follow, moment by moment. Patience became her ally, softening the edges of fear and transforming anticipation into a measured, almost meditative awareness. Within this embrace, she found a space to reflect on herself, her fears, her courage, and the quiet endurance she had cultivated through observation, ritual, and self-knowledge. Each small victory, each recognition of her own strength, reinforced the sense that she could meet the night with grace, even in moments of uncertainty. By leaning into patience, the bride realized that the night was no longer merely a trial to endure. It had become a space where resilience, awareness, and quiet courage could coexist, allowing her to move gently through each hour with calm, steady presence. As the hours deepened, the bride began to notice a steady rhythm within herself. Her breathing, once shallow and anxious, had grown slow and deliberate, each inhale and exhale carrying a quiet steadiness. Her heartbeat, felt lightly in her chest and hands, became a gentle metronome that guided her through the long night. This inner rhythm offered comfort and stability. Even in the presence of expectation and fear, she could align herself with her own pace, moving through moments intentionally rather than being swept along by uncertainty. Every small action, adjusting her gown, tracing the edges of the bedspread, or listening to the subtle sounds of the chamber, became part of this rhythm, reinforcing her sense of presence and calm. The room itself seemed to mirror this gentle cadence. Shadows moved predictably with the flickering candlelight. The faint scent of herbs lingered steadily in the air, and the quiet creaks of timber harmonized with her breathing. Through this alignment of body, mind, and environment, the bride found that she could navigate fear and anticipation with a soft resilience, rooted in awareness and deliberate attention. By embracing the comfort of her inner rhythm, she discovered that endurance was not only possible, it could be gentle, reflective, and even reassuring. The night, once daunting, became a landscape in which patience, courage, and self-awareness intertwined to carry her steadily forward. In the deep hours of the night, the bride realized the subtle power of observation. Every detail in the chamber, the flicker of the candlelight, the gentle sway of shadows, the faint scent of herbs lingering in the air, offered a point of focus that grounded her and eased the weight of fear. By attending carefully to these small elements, she discovered that awareness itself could be a quiet form of strength. Her own reactions, too, became objects of observation. She noticed how her body responded to the cool stone beneath her feet, the warmth of the bedspread against her skin, and the rhythm of her own breath. Even the rise and fall of her heartbeat became a familiar pattern to track, a subtle reassurance that she was present, alive, and capable of navigating the night. Observation allowed her to move with measured care. Shadows were no longer threatening but informative. Sounds were not alarming but predictable. The passing of time became something tangible, marked by rhythms she could follow. In this state, fear did not vanish, but it softened, tempered by deliberate attention and the recognition of her own endurance. Through the quiet strength of observation, the bride began to see that navigating the wedding night was less about conquest and more about mindful presence. She could meet each moment with calm awareness, drawing resilience from the careful attention she gave to herself, her surroundings, and the subtle rhythms of the night. By now, the bride had settled into a quiet understanding of her own capacity to adapt. The wedding night, once a looming and terrifying unknown, had transformed into a series of moments she could navigate with patience, awareness, and gentle intention. Each breath, gesture, and observation became part of a rhythm she had gradually mastered. She noticed how her body responded to this adaptation. Tension eased in her shoulders, her hands rested more lightly, and her breathing moved in a calm, steady cadence. Even the candlelight seemed softer, the shadows less imposing, as if the room itself had become attuned to her quiet resilience. Through careful observation, mindfulness, and repeated small rituals, she had claimed a measure of agency within a space that once felt entirely dictated by others. Adaptation did not erase fear, nor did it remove expectation. Instead, it allowed her to move alongside them, understanding that endurance and courage were cultivated through presence and deliberate action. In each moment of calm, in each act of patience, she found evidence of her own inner strength, a subtle triumph that required neither grand gestures nor forceful defiance. The night, once overwhelming, had become a landscape of possibility. Within its quiet hours, the bride discovered that she could meet tradition and expectation not with submission alone, but with the composed, deliberate resilience of one who knows herself and trusts in her own capacity to endure. As the first pale light of dawn began to filter through the small window, the bride felt a gentle shift in the chamber. Shadows softened into muted shapes, and the faint warmth of the rising sun mingled with the lingering candlelight, creating a quiet, comforting glow. The long hours of the night, once heavy with anticipation, fear, and uncertainty, had passed, leaving her with a sense of calm endurance. She noticed how her body had settled into its own rhythm, breathing steady, muscles relaxed, and hands resting lightly in her lap. The chamber, once imposing, now felt like a familiar companion. a space where she had navigated the unknown with quiet courage and careful presence. Each small ritual, every mindful breath, and every observation had woven together to carry her gently through the night. Dawn brought with it the soft realization of accomplishment, not in dramatic triumph, but in the quiet persistence of enduring, observing, and adapting. Fear had not vanished, but it had softened, tempered by awareness and patience. She had discovered that strength was not always loud or visible. Sometimes it was the gentle endurance that allowed a person to move through the most challenging hours with grace. As the light grew, she allowed herself a deep, steady breath, feeling the reassurance of survival and resilience. The night was over, but the lessons of presence, patience, and subtle courage would remain, carrying her forward into each day with quiet confidence. Thank you for joining this journey into the quiet, immersive world of A Medieval Bride's Wedding Night. As the dawn arrives, allow yourself to carry this calm into your own space, letting your body and mind relax, breathe, and settle. Remember that endurance and courage often come softly, through presence and awareness, rather than force. If you found this story soothing, immersive, or enlightening, please like, subscribe, and share your thoughts in the comments, especially if you're watching from the US, Europe, Canada, or anywhere else. No matter the time, may this story guide you gently toward rest, reflection, and calm. Good night, and may your dreams be serene.